Grenfell is a reminder of a long-running failure in our public life. We only take safety seriously in the aftermath of disaster. Some of what's happened this year has echoed what happened after the Ronan Point disaster of 1968, almost exactly 50 years ago, when a large portion of a brand new London high-rise block collapsed.
I've asked Mr. Hugh Griffiths, QC, to take charge of an inquiry into all the causes and circumstances of this disaster.
That's why I came straight back to Downing Street and I ordered a public inquiry. And we'll make sure that takes place as soon as possible to get to the bottom of this.
Miraculously, the collapse at Ronan Point claimed just 4 lives. But, as at Grenfell, residents were understandably worried.
If they offer you another flat, will you go in one?
Oh, no, thank you very much.
Anything like that anymore.
Not that silly.
No.
Both disasters were driven by governments with their eyes on one objective, who weren't paying enough attention to safety. Grenfell was one of hundreds of towers to get money to improve its energy efficiency. Ronan Point was part of a drive to lay on enormous quantities of new housing, needed thanks to a combination of bombs and baby booms.
The only answer is more houses. The government are looking to increasing the productivity in the building industry.
That drive for more homes faster led to the so-called large panel system. You got big, strong panels of concrete, and then you stacked them like this, a floor at a time. It was so simple you could even build them without scaffolding.
This is the external flank wall, the floor slab, and an internal cross wall.
The buildings, though, had major weaknesses. Here's Sam Webb showing the main vulnerability back in the 1980s. Mr. Webb is an architect who's devoted many years to tower safety. A single wall panel moving can bring down the building.
So long as it's standing, it looks safe. But if anything happens to move or remove one of those panels, then you get progressive collapse.
At Ronan Point, a small gas explosion knocked out just one wall, a particular danger because in these buildings, the joints holding the panels together were often botched. Instead of having concrete in the joints, some were found to be stuffed with newspaper.
The engineers hacked back the concrete and found in flat after flat that the metal bars meant to hold the panels onto the building were just not there. What proportion of bolts were missing and what proportion were put in?
I would say about 80% were missing and about 20% put in.
So if you could get unskilled people on piecework, building quite complex joints, in some cases joints that they couldn't actually see what they were doing, then that is a recipe for problems to occur.
So we ended up with these buildings where, in effect, the flats were balanced on top of one another, put together by basically unskilled labourers.
On piecework.
So they got more money the faster they did it?
Yes.
Large panel buildings also face a particular problem with fire. This is a fire test on the then empty Ronan Point, 16 years after the disaster.
You stopped the fire sooner than you had intended.
That's right.
Why did you do that?
Basically, we decided that we were not willing to take the risk of having a structural collapse in the block caused by us.
If you have a fire in one of these flats, it'll heat the ceiling above more than the other panels. That panel will expand and push out the walls. That will create gaps in the walls that fire can spread through, so containment may fail, and potentially could push the walls out altogether, triggering another collapse. In 1968, after Ronan Point, there was an inquiry. It found that these panel-built designs were fundamentally flawed, but these buildings were everywhere.
They took the gas out of the blocks. That makes a good PR stunt. They said they would strengthen the buildings. Nobody ever checked to see if they did, and they couldn't.
Even if buildings were reinforced and the gas supply taken out, problems remain. In 1984, concerns were raised about 2 blocks in Hammersmith and Fulham.
I think it would be
a very brave man who would be prepared to say that something was going to be safe for a longer period than 20 years. So, I mean, I can't say that we won't find more problems that we don't expect now. We know a lot more now about these buildings than we did 20 years ago.
The chief structural engineer for the borough wrote, "The tenants of Hartop Point and of Lannoy Point may be in great danger from collapse of all or part of these buildings in certain admittedly remote circumstances." You might have thought that that kind of report would be enough to doom a building, but 34 years on, these towers are still here. There was a survey earlier this year of the towers, and they found that while there had been strengthening of them, the fundamental problems with the design were still evident. The council say that these towers are safe, although further works are expected. There's still no gas allowed into these buildings, gas of any kind, and they now have fire marshals patrolling. This is an increasingly familiar story. So this is Leamington House.
Yeah.
This is from 1978, under a headline, "The Unexploded Time Bombs of Building." We took Sam Webb to Leamington House in Portsmouth. Concerns were first raised about this block in public in 1978.
And if you read...
They're pulling cladding off.
Oh, they took all the outside panels off.
Leamington House is a case linking Ronan Point to Grenfell. Both when they installed new cladding on the tower and then when they removed it, they found they had to address problems with the concrete structure.
Right, shall we have a look at the blocks?
Paula Walker has lived in the building since 1985.
The cladding was put on approximately 15 years ago, and that was when they first did the concrete problems, when they first reinforced the concrete.
So 15 years ago, when they're putting the cladding up, they realised they have to strengthen the building.
They did. They told us, when the work was finished, that this building would now have an extra 30 years of life.
And then this year?
This year, cladding came down.
Because they found it was unsafe?
Because of Grenfell. And when they took the cladding down, apparently they found the concrete wasn't safe.
The residents are being moved out, so the building can be reinforced again. More remedial works. Right now, these buildings are patrolled by security guards, watching to make sure no one brings in gas canisters.
Do you think it's an overreaction, that the council have overreacted to what they know about Grenfell?
I don't think it's an overreaction. No? I think this is a national problem. This is not Portsmouth's problem. The councillors who are now landed with this probably weren't born when Ronan Point was built.
So how many of these buildings are still up? Hannah Brack, an independent researcher, has found 200 towers of 20 stories or more. Another 430 towers with 15 or more floors. A further 660 towers with at least 10 stories. In total, she's found 1,585 Ronan Point style buildings in the UK. Doesn't the fact that we've had 50 years since Ronan Point and there hasn't been another collapse like it prove that actually what they did was fine?
It's been luck that's got us here. You know, we've got the whole of the press onto us about Grenfell. Do we really want to open up what could prove, and I think is, an even bigger can of worms? And, you know, and then you think, do I want to wake up one morning and find one of these buildings has collapsed?
Councils just keep finding problems with these buildings at the moment. Southwark evacuated the Ledbury estate last year. Concern is growing in official circles about them. These towers are ageing. Their floors are getting more dangerous. But you can't fix them without hard choices.
We thought this was going to be our forever home, use a modern phraseology. And yeah, here we go again. And God knows where we'd be. And these are lovely flats.
Newsnight has learned a building in London, already slated for demolition, is going to be examined as it's taken down to see how badly built it was. That may inform what comes next. our safety culture left this problem to fester for 50 years. A safety culture that led to Grenfell Tower.